The 32nd floor of Sterling Technologies hummed with the quiet efficiency that only money could buy. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's glittering skyline, where the Space Needle stood like a steel sentinel against the October evening sky. The air conditioning maintained a perfect 72 degrees, and the marble floors reflected the warm glow of designer lighting that cost more per fixture than most people made in a month. Ethan Sterling sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers flying across his laptop keyboard with the precision of a concert pianist. At 32, he had already revolutionized cloud computing twice, turned a small startup into a billion-dollar empire, and graced the cover of Forbes 3 times. His tailored Armani suit fit his lean frame perfectly, and his dark hair was styled with the kind of effortless perfection that actually required considerable effort to achieve. The clock on his desk read 11:47 p.m. Most of his employees had gone home hours ago, but Ethan thrived in the solitude of after-hours work. No interruptions, no small talk, no fake smiles from people who wanted something from him. Just pure, focused productivity. The quarterly board meeting was tomorrow, and the presentation had to be flawless. Ethan Sterling didn't do good enough or close. He did perfect every single time. It was the standard that had built his empire, and it was the standard that would maintain it. A soft knock interrupted his concentration. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd specifically instructed security that he was not to be disturbed under any circumstances. "Come in!" he called, not bothering to look up from his screen. His voice carried the kind of authority that made grown men stammer and seasoned executives second-guess themselves. The door opened, and someone entered with a quiet efficiency that suggested they were trying not to disturb him. Ethan assumed it was his assistant Patricia, though it was unusual for her to return this late. Perhaps she'd forgotten something. "Patricia, I thought I made it clear that—" Ethan began, finally glancing up. The words died in his throat. Standing in his doorway wasn't Patricia's familiar figure in her conservative business attire. Instead, a woman in her late 20s wearing a navy blue janitor's uniform held a mop bucket in one hand and a cleaning cart handle in the other. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore no makeup, but her face had the kind of natural beauty that didn't need enhancement. What struck Ethan most, however, were her eyes, deep brown and remarkably intelligent, with a spark that suggested she was far more observant than her position might indicate. "Sorry," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that hinted at Latina heritage. "I didn't realize anyone was still here. I can come back later." Ethan blinked, momentarily thrown off his rhythm. In his world, people appeared in his office by appointment only, after passing through multiple layers of assistance and security. The cleaning staff was supposed to be invisible, finishing their work before he arrived or after he left, maintaining the pristine environment without ever crossing paths with the executives. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his tone automatically shifting into the cold authority he used with subordinates. "I specifically instructed that this floor was off-limits during my evening work sessions." The woman, Maya, according to her name tag, tilted her head slightly, studying him with those intelligent eyes. "Actually," she said, her voice calm and measured, "I'm supposed to clean this office every Tuesday and Friday night. It's been on my schedule for 3 months now. You're usually gone by 9. Something in her tone made Ethan's eyebrows rise. She wasn't apologizing profusely or backing away like most people did when he used his CEO voice. Instead, she was stating facts with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. "Well, I'm here now," Ethan said, his voice taking on an edge that had made venture capitalists nervous and competitors retreat. "So you'll have to come back tomorrow." Maya set down her mop bucket with a soft thud and crossed her arms. The gesture was subtle, but it shifted the dynamic in the room entirely. "Tomorrow is Saturday," she pointed out. "I don't work weekends. And if I don't clean this office tonight, I'll be behind on my schedule, which means I'll get written up, which means I might lose this job that I actually need. Ethan stared at her, genuinely shocked. In his entire career, no employee, no person, for that matter, had ever spoken to him with such direct contradiction. People agreed with him, complimented his brilliance, or at worst, presented alternative viewpoints with excessive deference and qualifications. They didn't simply tell him he was wrong. "Excuse me?" The words came out colder than a Seattle winter morning. Maya seemed entirely unaffected by his tone. "Look, Mr. Sterling," she said, reading his name from the nameplate on his desk, "I understand that you're important and busy and all that, but I've got a job to do, just like you do. The difference is, if you stay late, you probably make more money. If I don't finish my work, I lose money, so maybe we can figure out a way to coexist for 20 minutes while I clean around you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, complete speechlessness. His mind, usually 3 steps ahead of any conversation, seemed to have short-circuited. Maya interpreted his silence as consideration. "I'll be quiet," she offered, already moving toward the windows with a spray bottle and cloth. "You won't even know I'm here." "That's not the point," Ethan finally managed, his voice climbing slightly. "The point is that I specifically arranged to have privacy during my work sessions. I don't care about your schedule." "Of course you don't." The words were spoken quietly, almost under her breath, but they hit Ethan like a physical blow. Maya continued cleaning the windows, her movements efficient and practiced, as if she hadn't just delivered what felt like the most devastating critique he'd heard in years. "What did you just say?" Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. Maya turned around, meeting his gaze directly. "I said, of course you don't. You don't care about my schedule, just like you probably don't care about anyone else's schedule, unless it directly affects you. It's not personal, it's just how people like you operate." "People like me?" Ethan stood up, his full height adding to his intimidating presence. At 6 feet 2 inches, he was accustomed to literally looking down on people during confrontations. Maya, who couldn't have been more than 5 feet 6 inches, didn't seem impressed. Rich people, powerful people, people who have never had to worry about whether they can pay rent or buy groceries, or keep a job that barely covers their expenses. Each word was delivered with calm precision, like surgical cuts. Ethan felt his face flush with anger, but underneath the anger was something else, something that felt uncomfortably like shame. "You don't know anything about me," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I know enough," Maya replied, turning back to her cleaning. "I know that you think 20 minutes of your time is worth more than my job security. I know that you've never had to clean an office at midnight because it's the only shift that fits around your other responsibilities. And I know that you're probably going to have me fired after tonight because God forbid someone tell you something you don't want to hear." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Because the terrible truth was that Maya was absolutely right. His first instinct had been to call security, to have her removed, and ensure she never set foot in the building again. The fact that she had predicted his reaction so accurately made him feel transparent in a way that was deeply uncomfortable. "For what it's worth," Maya continued, spraying down his conference table, "I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I just need this job, and I'm good at it. I keep your office cleaner than you probably realize. I never disturb your things, and I've never been late or missed a day in 3 months. All I was asking for was 20 minutes to do the work I'm paid to do." Ethan sank back into his chair, feeling oddly deflated. He watched Maya work. Her movements were indeed efficient and thorough, and he found himself noticing details about his office that he'd never seen before. The way she carefully dusted around his awards without disturbing their arrangement. How she emptied his trash bin and replaced the liner with practiced ease. The gentle way she straightened the papers on his desk without looking at their contents. "How do you know I've never had to worry about money?" he asked suddenly. Maya paused in her cleaning and looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to continue the conversation. "Lucky guess," she said, but her tone was gentler now. "Plus, your suit probably costs more than I make in 6 months, and you've got family photos on your desk showing vacations to places I've only seen in magazines." Ethan glanced at the silver-framed photos. Him skiing in Aspen, sailing in the Mediterranean, standing in front of his parents' estate in Martha's Vineyard. Images of a life so privileged it might as well have been from another planet. "You're probably right about most of that," he admitted, surprising himself with the concession, "but you're wrong about one thing." Maya raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I'm not going to have you fired." Relief flickered across her features so briefly that Ethan almost missed it. The fact that she had been genuinely worried about losing her job made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "Thank you," she said simply. They fell into an odd silence. Maya continued cleaning while Ethan pretended to work on his presentation, but found himself stealing glances at her instead. There was something mesmerizing about her competence, the way she moved through his space with quiet confidence. When she reached for a book on his shelf to dust beneath it, he noticed her fingers lingering on the spine. "You can look at it," he found himself saying. Maya glanced over at him. "Sorry? The book?" "You looked interested." A slight smile crossed her features, the first genuine warmth he'd seen from her. "It's Neruda," she said. "I didn't expect to find poetry in a tech CEO's office." You know Neruda?" "Love is so short, forgetting is so long," Maya quoted softly, her accent making the words sound like music. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself over years of corporate battles and calculated relationships. "You read poetry. You read—" "I have a master's degree in literature," Maya said, then immediately looked like she regretted sharing that information. "Then what are you doing?" Ethan began, then stopped himself as he realized how insulting the question would sound. "Cleaning offices?" Maya finished for him, her voice matter-of-fact rather than defensive. "Student loans don't pay themselves. The job market for literature majors isn't exactly booming. And contrary to popular belief, having a degree doesn't automatically make you too good for honest work." The rebuke was gentle but pointed. Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks again, but this time it was embarrassment rather than anger. Maya finished dusting his bookshelf and moved on to the small kitchen area adjacent to his office. As she worked, Ethan found himself watching her with growing fascination. Here was someone who could quote Pablo Neruda while cleaning his coffee maker, who had stood up to him without flinching, who had somehow managed to make him feel both humbled and intrigued within the span of 20 minutes. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said, as Maya finished her work and began packing up her supplies. She looked at him warily. "Shoot. What made you think you could talk to me the way you did? I mean, most people—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding arrogant. Maya considered the question seriously. "Most people what? Most people are afraid of you?" Ethan nodded, feeling foolish for admitting it. "I've got nothing to lose," Maya said with a shrug. "You were going to be angry with me no matter what I said or did. I could have apologized and groveled and begged for forgiveness, and you still would have seen me as an inconvenience. So I figured I might as well be honest. And if I had fired you, then I would have found another job. There's always another job for people like me. We're used to being disposable." Didn't the casual way she said it, without self-pity or bitterness, just stating a fact, hit Ethan harder than any accusation could have. He realized that Maya's fearlessness hadn't come from bravery or rebellion. It had come from the kind of vulnerability that only people who lived on the edge of financial security truly understood. "Well," Maya said, slinging her supply bag over her shoulder, "your office is clean and you've got your privacy back. I'll try to work around your schedule in the future." She headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. "For what it's worth, Mr. Sterling, your presentation looks impressive. I hope your board meeting goes well tomorrow." And with that she was gone, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the faint scent of lemon cleaning solution. He stared at the door for a long moment, then looked around his office. It was indeed immaculate, cleaner than he'd ever noticed before. Every surface gleamed, every item was perfectly arranged, and somehow the space felt more inviting than it had in months. Ethan tried to return to his presentation, but found his concentration completely shattered. Instead, he kept replaying the conversation, analyzing Maya's words and expressions like he was trying to decode a complex algorithm. No one had ever spoken to him with such frank honesty. No one had ever made him feel so simultaneously challenged and interested. He picked up the Neruda book Maya had noticed and flipped through its pages, finding the poem she had quoted. As he read the familiar words, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, something that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or board meetings. For the first time in years, Ethan Sterling had met someone who saw him not as a powerful CEO or a brilliant entrepreneur, but simply as a person, and that person, apparently, wasn't particularly impressed. The thought should have been insulting. Instead, as Ethan finally packed up his things and headed home through the empty Seattle streets, he found it oddly exhilarating. Maya Rodriguez pushed through the revolving doors of Sterling Technologies at exactly 11:15 p.m. the following Tuesday, her cleaning cart squeaking slightly on the polished marble floor. The lobby was tomb-quiet, except for the ambient hum of expensive air conditioning and the distant murmur of the night security desk. She nodded to Jerry, the guard who'd been working the night shift for as long as she'd been employed here. "Evening, Maya," Jerry called softly. "Heard you had quite the encounter with the big boss last week." Maya's steps faltered slightly. In a building this size, gossip traveled faster than the express elevators. "Just doing my job," she replied, hoping her voice sounded more casual than she felt. The truth was, she'd been thinking about Ethan Sterling all week. Not in the way romance novels described. She wasn't swooning over his chiseled jawline or fantasizing about his wealth. Instead, she found herself analyzing their conversation with the same intensity she'd once applied to dissecting Victorian literature. There had been something in his eyes during those final moments, a flicker of something that seemed almost vulnerable. She shook her head, annoyed with herself. The man was a billionaire who'd probably forgotten her existence the moment she'd left his office. Rich people didn't lose sleep over interactions with the cleaning staff. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt longer than usual. As the doors opened, Maya found herself hoping that Ethan would be gone, that she could clean his office in peace and forget about the strange energy that had crackled between them. But even as she hoped for his absence, a small part of her, a part she refused to acknowledge, was disappointed at the thought. She rounded the corner toward his office and stopped short. Ethan Sterling was not only still there, but he was pacing behind his desk like a caged panther, gesticulating wildly as he spoke into a Bluetooth headset. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his tie was loosened around his neck. Even from a distance, Maya could sense the tension radiating from him. "No, David, you're not listening," Ethan was saying, his voice carrying the sharp edge of barely controlled frustration. "The Singapore deal is falling apart because Mitchell couldn't keep his mouth shut about the expansion timeline. Now the entire Pacific Rim partnership is in jeopardy, and somehow that's my fault?" Maya hesitated in the doorway. Last week, Ethan had been composed, authoritative, completely in control. This version, disheveled and agitated, was entirely different. Human, somehow. Ethan glanced up and saw her standing there. For a split second, their eyes met, and Maya saw something flash across his features. Relief? Embarrassment? She couldn't tell. "David, I need to go," Ethan said into his headset. "We'll continue this tomorrow." "Yes, I know what time it is in London. Fine, call me in 4 hours. He tapped his ear to end the call and stood there for a moment, shoulders sagging slightly. Maya realized she was witnessing something private. A moment when the great Ethan Sterling wasn't performing for anyone. "Bad night?" she asked, immediately regretting the personal question. Ethan's head snapped up, his corporate mask sliding back into place. "Nothing I can't handle," he said automatically, then seemed to catch himself. "Sorry, you're here to work. Don't let me stop you." But there was something different in his tone from last week. Less dismissive, more aware of her as a person. Maya wheeled her cart into the office, hyper-aware of his presence. "Big deal falling through?" she asked as she began organizing her supplies. "The Singapore expansion," Ethan said, then looked surprised that he'd answered. 3 years of negotiations, and it might collapse because of one investor's loose lips and bad timing. Maya nodded as she started dusting his bookshelf, the same shelf where she'd lingered over the Neruda collection. "Sometimes the best deals are the ones that fall through," she said thoughtfully. Ethan paused in his pacing. "What do you mean?" "My grandmother used to say that when a door slams shut, it's usually because you were about to walk into the wrong room." Maya moved to his desk, carefully dusting around the family photos. "Maybe Singapore wasn't the right fit, and this is just the universe's way of telling you to look elsewhere." "The universe," Ethan repeated, and Maya caught the slight skepticism in his voice. "You don't believe in signs?" she asked, glancing at him with a small smile. "I believe in market research, due diligence, and strategic planning," Ethan replied. "The universe doesn't factor into quarterly projections." Maya laughed, a genuine musical sound that seemed to brighten the entire office. "God, you really are every stereotype of a tech CEO, aren't you?" The words were teasing rather than cruel, and to Maya's surprise, Ethan's mouth quirked upward in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I prefer focused to stereotypical," he said. "Focused," Maya repeated, testing the word. "Is that what you call it when you're in the office at midnight having heated phone calls with London?" "It's called being responsible for 8,000 employees and billions in investor capital," Ethan said, but there was less bite in his voice than there might have been. Maya paused in her cleaning and looked at him directly. "When's the last time you went home before 10 p.m.? The question caught Ethan off guard. That's not really relevant. When's the last time you had dinner with friends, went to a movie, read a book that wasn't related to business strategy?" Each question hit like a small dart, and Ethan found himself mentally scrambling for answers that didn't make him sound pathetic. The truth was, he couldn't remember the last time he'd done any of those things. "I have a very demanding career," he said finally. "You have a life," Maya countered gently. "Or at least, you're supposed to have one." She moved to clean the windows, and Ethan found himself watching her work again. There was something soothing about her presence, something that made the knot of tension in his shoulders loosen slightly. "What about you?" he asked suddenly. "Besides cleaning offices and reading poetry, what does Maya Rodriguez do with her free time?" Maya glanced at him, surprised by the personal question. "I teach ESL classes at the community center on weekends," she said. "Help kids with their homework, write terrible short stories that will never be published." "You write fiction." "Badly," Maya said with a self-deprecating smile. "But it makes me happy, which is more than most people can say about their hobbies." Ethan considered this. "I used to play piano," he said, then looked startled that he'd shared the information. "Used to?" "No time," he said automatically. "Or no permission," Maya said quietly. Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" "Sometimes we tell ourselves we don't have time for things when what we really mean is that we don't give ourselves permission to enjoy them." Maya finished the windows and moved on to emptying the trash bins. Powerful people are especially bad about that. "It's like you think happiness is frivolous." "That's ridiculous," Ethan protested. "Is it?" Maya challenged. "When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Not because it was productive or profitable or strategic, just because it brought you joy." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The question seemed simple, but he found himself genuinely unable to answer it. Maya seemed to sense his discomfort and changed the subject. "So, what happens if Singapore falls through completely?" We look at other markets, Ethan said, grateful for the return to safer territory. Australia, maybe, or we focus on domestic expansion. Or, Maya said, straightening up from where she'd been cleaning his coffee station, maybe you take it as a sign that you need to slow down and figure out what you actually want, instead of just pursuing the next big acquisition. The suggestion was so foreign to Ethan's way of thinking that he actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. I can't just slow down. I have responsibilities, investors, employees who depend on you being miserable, Maya interrupted. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. I'm not miserable. Maya studied his face for a long moment. No, she said finally. You're not miserable. You're exhausted. There's a difference. The observation was delivered with such gentle accuracy that Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen past the success, the power, the carefully constructed image? When was the last time someone had cared enough to notice that he was tired? You don't know me well enough to make that assessment, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Maybe not, Maya agreed, packing up her supplies. But I know what exhaustion looks like. I work 3 jobs, remember? 3 jobs? Ethan's eyebrows shot up. This one, weekend tutoring, and I freelance edit papers for college students. Maya slung her supply bag over her shoulder. The difference is, I chose this schedule because I'm working toward something. You seem to be working just to work. She headed toward the door, then paused and turned back, just as she had the week before. Can I tell you something, Mr. Sterling? Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. Success without satisfaction isn't actually success. It's just expensive misery. And with that devastating observation, she was gone again, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the lingering scent of lemon cleaning solution. But this time, instead of trying to return to his work, Ethan walked over to his bookshelf and pulled out the Neruda collection. He flipped to the poem Maya had quoted, reading the words slowly. Love is so short, forgetting is so long. He thought about Maya's questions, her gentle challenges, the way she'd looked at him with those intelligent brown eyes and seen something he'd forgotten existed, the person he used to be before he became consumed by building his empire. Ethan closed the book and walked to his piano, a beautiful Steinway grand that sat in the corner of his office like an expensive piece of furniture. He hadn't played in over 2 years. His fingers found the keys hesitantly, picking out a simple melody from memory. The sound was rusty, imperfect, but for the first time in months, Ethan felt something that might have been peace. Outside his windows, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, and for once, Ethan wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or board meetings or Singapore expansions. He was thinking about a woman who cleaned his office and read poetry, and somehow managed to see right through him. And for the first time in years, he was looking forward to next Tuesday night. 3 floors down, Maya was cleaning another executive's office, but her mind kept drifting to the exhaustion she'd seen in Ethan Sterling's eyes. Despite his wealth and power, despite his arrogance and privilege, there had been something almost heartbreaking about his inability to answer simple questions about happiness and joy. Maya had learned long ago that money didn't buy fulfillment. She'd seen enough wealthy families' dirty laundry while cleaning their homes to know that much. But there had been something particularly poignant about Ethan's confusion when she challenged him about slowing down, about doing things simply for happiness. As she worked, Maya found herself wondering what Ethan Sterling had been like before he became a CEO. Had he always been so driven, so focused on achievement? Or had there been a version of him that played piano and read poetry and believed in signs from the universe? The thought should have felt presumptuous. What business did she have wondering about the inner life of a billionaire? But as Maya packed up her cart and prepared to move to the next floor, she couldn't shake the feeling that underneath all that power and success was someone who desperately needed a friend, someone who'd forgotten how to be human. And despite every rational thought telling her to maintain professional distance, Maya Rodriguez found herself hoping that next Tuesday, Ethan Sterling would still be there when she arrived to clean his office. Because everyone deserved to be seen, even CEOs who'd forgotten how to live. The third Tuesday arrived with an unusual twist of fate that neither Maya nor Ethan could have predicted. Maya was running 45 minutes late due to a broken-down bus and a subsequent frantic dash through Seattle's drizzling streets. By the time she reached the 32nd floor, slightly out of breath and with damp hair escaping from her ponytail, she expected to find Ethan's office dark and empty. Instead, she found him hunched over his laptop, but this time he wasn't barking orders into a headset or pacing with corporate fury. He was simply sitting there, staring at his screen with an expression of complete bewilderment. "You're still here," Maya said, slightly breathless as she wheeled her cart into the office. Ethan looked up, and Maya was surprised to see something that looked almost like relief cross his features. "Maya," he said, and the way he said her name, like he was genuinely glad to see her, made something flutter in her chest. "Sorry I'm late," she began, then stopped. "Wait, did you just call me Maya?" Ethan blinked, seeming to realize that he had indeed abandoned the formal Ms. Rodriguez he'd been using. Yes, Maya. Is that not okay?" "It's fine," Maya said, trying to hide her smile. "Just unexpected. Usually takes people in suits months to start using my actual name." "People in suits," Ethan repeated, and Maya caught the slight wince in his voice. "Present company excluded, of course," Maya said with a teasing smile that somehow managed to be both playful and kind. Ethan found himself smiling back, a real smile, not the practiced corporate expression he wore in meetings. "Of course." Maya began setting up her supplies, but she kept glancing at Ethan. There was something different about his energy tonight. Less frenetic, but also more lost somehow. "Rough day?" she asked, echoing her question from the previous week. "Rough month," Ethan admitted, running a hand through his hair. "The Singapore deal officially collapsed yesterday. The Australian negotiations aren't going much better, and my board is starting to question whether I'm losing my edge." Maya paused in her dusting. "Are you?" The directness of the question caught Ethan off guard. Anyone else would have offered reassurances or corporate platitudes. Maya simply asked for the truth. "I don't know," he said, and the admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "For the first time in my career, I honestly don't know." Maya studied his face for a moment, then made a decision that would later seem either brilliant or completely insane. "When's the last time you left this building during daylight hours?" Ethan frowned, trying to remember. "Last weekend, I think. I went to the gym. The gym in the basement of this building." Ethan's silence was answer enough. "Right," Maya said, setting down her cleaning supplies with a decisive thud. "We're going on a field trip." "A what?" Ethan stared at her as if she'd suggested they rob a bank. "A field trip. Come on." Maya was already moving toward his coat closet, pulling out his expensive wool overcoat. "You need to get out of this office and remember what the real world looks like." "Maya, I can't just leave. I have work." "The work will be here when you get back," Maya said, holding out his coat with the kind of patient determination usually reserved for dealing with stubborn children. "Trust me, the corporate world won't collapse if Ethan Sterling takes 2 hours to be a human being." Ethan stared at the coat, then at Maya, then at his laptop screen full of spreadsheets and projections. For a moment, Maya thought he was going to refuse, retreat back into his safe world of numbers and strategies. Then, to her amazement, he stood up and reached for his coat. 2 hours, he said, as if setting a boundary would make this impulsive decision more reasonable. 2 hours, Maya agreed, though she was already planning to stretch it to 3. 20 minutes later, they were walking through Pike Place Market, and Ethan Sterling looked like he'd been dropped onto an alien planet. The market was winding down for the evening, but there was still enough activity to assault his senses. Vendors calling out their wares, the smell of fresh fish and coffee and rain-soaked concrete, the casual chaos of people who weren't wearing suits or checking their phones every 30 seconds. "When's the last time you were here?" Maya asked, watching Ethan's face as he took in the organized chaos around them. I honestly can't remember, Ethan admitted. Maybe college. I used to come here with... He trailed off, looking surprised at himself. With who? My roommate Danny. We'd come here on Saturday mornings, buy coffee and pastries, and just walk around for hours talking about everything and nothing. Ethan's voice carried a note of wistfulness that Maya had never heard before. What happened to Danny? Life, Ethan said simply. I got busy building my company. He became a high school teacher in Portland. We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, then... He shrugged. Maya nodded, understanding the unfinished sentence. She'd watched friendships dissolve the same way, slowly, through neglect rather than conflict. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, weaving between the vendors and tourists. Maya watched Ethan gradually relax, his shoulders losing some of their perpetual tension, his stride becoming less purposeful and more exploratory. Okay, Maya said, stopping in front of a small bookstore tucked between a flower vendor and a coffee roastery. Pop quiz. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A quiz. If you could buy any book in this store, not for research, not for business strategy, just for the pure pleasure of reading, what would it be? Ethan stared at the bookstore's window display, looking as if Maya had asked him to solve quantum physics. I'm not sure I remember how to read for pleasure. The admission was so honest and slightly heartbreaking that Maya felt her chest tighten. Then we'll have to remind you, she said gently. They spent the next 45 minutes browsing the narrow aisles of the bookstore. Maya watched in fascination as Ethan slowly shed his corporate persona, becoming increasingly animated as he rediscovered books he'd loved in college, authors he'd forgotten existed, entire genres he'd abandoned in favor of business journals and market analyses. I used to love science fiction, he said, holding up a worn copy of Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. I must have read this a dozen times in college. So buy it, Maya said simply. I already own a copy, somewhere, that you haven't read in years and probably can't find, Maya pointed out. Buy it. Read it again. See if it still means the same thing to you. Ethan looked at the book in his hands, as if it were a foreign object. It seems frivolous. It seems human, Maya corrected. There's a difference. They left the bookstore with 3 books. The Le Guin novel, a collection of short stories by Alice Munro that Maya had recommended, and a slim volume of Mary Oliver's poetry that Ethan had picked up almost unconsciously. Coffee? Maya asked, nodding toward the roastery next door. It's almost 1 a.m., Ethan pointed out. So? So we'll never sleep. Maya grinned. When's the last time you stayed up late because you were having fun instead of working? Again, Ethan found himself unable to answer. The coffee shop was nearly empty except for a few other night owls, and what appeared to be a group of university students engaged in an intense debate about postmodern literature. Maya and Ethan found a small table by the window, their books stacked between them like a bridge. Can I ask you something? Ethan said after they'd settled with their coffee. A simple black coffee for him, a lavender honey latte for Maya. Shoot. Why are you doing this? Taking me on a field trip, I mean. We barely know each other. Maya considered the question seriously, wrapping her hands around her warm mug. Because you looked lost, she said finally. Really, truly lost. And because I've been lost before, and I know what it feels like to have forgotten who you are, underneath all the things you do. What do you mean? Maya was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee. After I graduated with my master's degree, I had this plan. I was going to be a professor, or work for a publishing house, or write the great American novel. I had this whole identity built around being an intellectual, a writer, someone who contributed to culture and literature. She paused, taking a sip of her latte. Then reality hit. Student loans, rent, grocery bills. I took the cleaning job as a temporary thing, while I looked for something in my field. That was 3 years ago. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Do you regret it, taking the job? Some days, Maya admitted, But not because the work is beneath me. It's not. Honest work is honest work. I regret it because somewhere along the way, I started defining myself by my circumstances instead of my dreams. I stopped writing, stopped reading for pleasure, stopped believing that I could be more than just someone who cleans offices. But you still teach ESL classes. You still read poetry. Now I do, Maya said with a small smile. It took me a while to remember that I'm allowed to be more than one thing. I can clean offices and love literature. I can struggle financially and still believe in beauty and art and possibility. Ethan stared at her, struck by the quiet strength in her voice. How do you do it? Hold on to hope when everything seems stacked against you. The same way you built a billion-dollar company, I imagine, Maya said, one day at a time, refusing to give up, even when it feels impossible. That's different. I had advantages. You had privileges, Maya corrected gently. But that doesn't diminish what you accomplished. Building something from nothing still takes vision and determination and countless sacrifices. The problem isn't what you've achieved, Ethan. The problem is that you've forgotten why you wanted to achieve it in the first place. Ethan felt something shift inside him as Maya said his name. Not Mr. Sterling, not Sir, just Ethan, spoken like he was a person worth knowing rather than a title worth respecting. I used to want to change the world, he said quietly. I started the company because I believed technology could solve problems, could make people's lives better. Somewhere along the way, it became about market share and profit margins and proving that I was the smartest person in the room. Maybe it still can be about changing the world, Maya said. Maybe you just need to remember what kind of change you actually want to make. They talked until the coffee shop closed at 2 a.m., their conversation meandering through topics as diverse as childhood dreams, the gentrification of Seattle, the ethics of artificial intelligence, and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Maya was firmly pro-pineapple. Ethan was scandalized by the very concept. As they walked back towards Sterling Technologies, where Maya's car was parked and Ethan would presumably retrieve his own vehicle, the Seattle streets were quiet, except for the occasional taxi and the distant sound of late-night revelers. "Thank you," Ethan said as they reached the building entrance. "For what?" "For reminding me that there's a world outside my office, He paused, struggling to find words for something he'd never had to articulate before. "For seeing me as a person instead of a position." Maya smiled, and in the soft glow of the streetlights, Ethan thought she looked almost luminous. "Everyone deserves to be seen, Ethan, even CEOs who've forgotten how to be human." They stood there for a moment, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. Ethan felt the urge to say something more, to somehow extend this evening, to find a way to make this connection last beyond Tuesday night encounters in his office. "Maya," he began, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. "Yes? Would you... That is, if you're not busy this weekend." Ethan felt like a teenager asking someone to prom. "Would you like to have dinner? Somewhere that's not a coffee shop at 2 in the morning?" Maya's eyes widened slightly. "Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Sterling?" The formal address was clearly teasing, but it made Ethan smile. "I'm asking Maya Rodriguez if she'd like to have dinner with Ethan Sterling." Two people who apparently have more in common than their circumstances might suggest. Maya studied his face for a long moment, and Ethan held his breath, suddenly realizing that her answer mattered more than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd like that very much." Relief flooded through Ethan's chest. "Saturday, 7 o'clock?" "Saturday at 7, Maya agreed. "But not anywhere too fancy. I don't own anything that costs more than my monthly rent." Ethan laughed, a genuine delighted sound. "I know just the place." As Maya drove away in her 10-year-old Honda Civic, Ethan stood on the sidewalk watching her taillights disappear into the Seattle night. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about quarterly projections or market expansion or board meetings. He was thinking about Saturday night, and the woman who'd somehow managed to remind him that success without joy was just expensive emptiness. And as he finally headed home with his bag of books and the lingering taste of lavender honey latte, Ethan Sterling felt something he'd almost forgotten existed: anticipation for something that had nothing to do with business. Saturday evening found Ethan Sterling standing in front of his walk-in closet, staring at his clothes with the same intensity he usually reserved for financial projections. Everything he owned screamed expensive: custom suits, designer casual wear, shoes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. How did one dress down when down still meant several $1,000s? He settled on dark jeans, the most casual item he owned, and a simple navy sweater, then immediately second-guessed himself. Was this too casual? Not casual enough? When was the last time he'd been on a real date, not a corporate dinner disguised as romance? His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Running 5 minutes late. Bus was delayed. Sorry." Ethan smiled, typing back, "No problem, I'll wait." Then he paused, deleted the message, and wrote instead, "Take your time. Looking forward to seeing you." The restaurant he'd chosen was a small Italian place in Capitol Hill. Family-owned, authentic, the kind of place where the owner's grandmother's photos lined the walls, and the pasta was made fresh daily. Not the sort of establishment that appeared in business magazines or hosted power lunches. Perfect. Maya arrived 7 minutes late, slightly breathless and apologetic, wearing a simple black dress and a denim jacket that looked like it had seen better years, but somehow made her look effortlessly beautiful. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore just enough makeup to highlight her natural features. Sorry, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "The bus broke down, and then I couldn't find parking and—" "Maya," Ethan interrupted gently, "breathe. You're here. That's all that matters." She looked at him, really looked, and he saw something in her eyes that might have been surprise. "You're being very understanding for someone who probably has his entire evening scheduled to the minute." "Actually," Ethan said, "I cleared my entire weekend. No schedule, no agenda, no backup plans. Just whatever happens, happens." Maya blinked. "Who are you? And what did you do with Ethan Sterling?" "Funny," Ethan said with a grin. "I was wondering the same thing." The evening unfolded with surprising ease. Over plates of handmade ravioli and glasses of Chianti, they talked about everything except their work. Maya told him about growing up in a family where 3 generations lived under one roof, where dinner conversations happened in 2 languages and everyone had an opinion about everything. Ethan shared stories about boarding school loneliness and summers spent at his grandparents' farm, the only place where he'd ever felt like a normal kid. "So you do have a childhood," Maya teased. "I was starting to wonder if you'd emerged fully formed from a business school textbook." "Very funny," Ethan said, twirling pasta on his fork. "Though sometimes I wonder if that might have been easier." "Easier how?" Ethan considered the question. "If I'd been born knowing exactly what I was supposed to be, successful, driven, focused on achievement, maybe I wouldn't feel so displaced sometimes." Maya set down her wine glass. "Displaced? Like I'm playing a role that fits perfectly on the outside but feels wrong on the inside," Ethan admitted. "Does that make sense?" "Under perfect sense," Maya said softly. "I think most people feel that way sometimes. The difference is most of us don't have the luxury of changing the role." "You think I do? Have that luxury?" Maya studied his face. "I think you have more choices than you realize. The question is whether you're brave enough to make them." Before Ethan could respond, the restaurant owner, a robust man in his 60s, approached their table with a smile. "Everything good here?" he asked, his slight Italian accent making the words musical. "Perfect," Maya said warmly. "The ravioli is incredible." "Ah, you have good taste," the man beamed. "My wife, she makes the pasta fresh every morning. 40 years we've been married. 40 years she makes the pasta. Every day the same, but somehow always a little different." That's beautiful, Maya said, and Ethan could hear genuine emotion in her voice. Is love, the man said simply. Real love. It grows every day, even when it looks the same from outside. After he walked away, Maya and Ethan sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Do you believe that? Ethan asked finally. That love grows even when it looks the same? I want to, Maya said. My parents have been married 32 years. Some days they drive each other crazy, but there's this steadiness between them, this quiet certainty that they're exactly where they belong. My parents divorced when I was 16, Ethan said. Very civilized, very expensive, very final. They shook hands at the end like they'd just concluded a business transaction. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was probably for the best. They were never really suited to each other, just two people who looked good on paper. Ethan paused. I used to wonder if that's all I'd ever find. Someone who looked good on paper. Maya felt something flutter in her chest. And now, Ethan met her eyes across the table. Now I'm having dinner with someone who definitely doesn't look good on paper, and I can't remember the last time I've enjoyed myself this much. Gee, thanks, Maya said with mock offense. Way to make a girl feel special. You know what I mean, Ethan said, his voice growing serious. On paper, we make no sense. Different backgrounds, different worlds, different everything. But sitting here with you feels more real than anything I've experienced in years. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. Ethan, sorry, he said quickly. Too much too soon. No, Maya said softly. Not too much, just unexpected. They walked slowly back to Maya's car, neither wanting the evening to end. The Seattle air was crisp but not cold, and the streets of Capitol Hill buzzed with Saturday night energy, couples heading to late dinners, friends bar hopping, musicians carrying guitar cases to venues. This is me, Maya said, stopping next to her Honda Civic. In the parking lot full of newer, sleeker cars, it looked humble but well-maintained. Thank you for tonight, Ethan said, for saying yes, for giving this a chance. Thank you for asking, Maya replied, and for choosing somewhere I could actually afford to reciprocate. Ethan laughed. Is that what you're worried about? Reciprocating? Among other things, Maya admitted. They stood by her car, the space between them charged with possibility. Ethan wanted to kiss her, had been thinking about it for the last hour, but something held him back. This felt too important to rush, too precious to risk with the wrong move at the wrong moment. Maya, he said instead, would you like to do this again, maybe next weekend? Yes, she said without hesitation. But next time, I choose the place. Deal, Ethan said, though I should warn you, I've become quite fond of places that don't require reservations weeks in advance. Maya smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. I think you might be full of surprises, Ethan Sterling. I'm hoping so, he said, covering her hand with his. I'm really hoping so. As Maya drove away, Ethan stood in the parking lot watching her taillights disappear, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, the giddy anticipation of possibility. Not business possibility or financial opportunity, but the simple, profound possibility of connection with another human being. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan Sterling was falling for someone who saw him not as a conquest or a stepping stone, but simply as a man worth knowing. And it was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely perfect. The second date was Maya's turn to choose, and she picked a place that would have given Ethan's usual dining companions heart palpitations. A hole-in-the-wall taco truck parked in Georgetown, where the only seating was a handful of picnic tables, and the most expensive item on the menu cost $8. Ethan arrived in his Tesla, drawing curious stares from the construction workers and warehouse employees who comprised the truck's usual clientele. He'd attempted casual again, jeans and a button-down shirt, but even his casual clothes screamed money in a way that made Maya slightly nervous. You sure about this? Maya asked as they approached the truck, watching Ethan take in the industrial neighborhood with barely concealed bewilderment. Absolutely, Ethan said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "I trust your judgment." "Be famous last words," Maya muttered, but she was smiling. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other at a weathered picnic table, sharing fish tacos that were arguably the best in Seattle and definitely the most authentic. Ethan had initially approached the food with the caution of someone accustomed to five-star presentations, but after the first bite, his expression shifted to genuine appreciation. "This is incredible," he said, and Maya felt a flutter of pride at his obvious surprise. "You sound shocked," she teased. "Not shocked, just educated," Ethan admitted. "I've been living in a very small bubble for a very long time." They were interrupted by Maya's phone, buzzing insistently. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "Sorry, I need to take this," she said, answering the call. "Mama? ¿Qué pasó?" Ethan watched as Maya's expression shifted from confusion to concern to something approaching panic. She spoke rapidly in Spanish, her voice growing more agitated with each exchange. "Sí, voy para allá ahora," she said finally, ending the call and immediately standing up. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, rising with her. "My dad had an accident at work," Maya said, already gathering her things. "Nothing life-threatening, but he's at Harborview Hospital, and my mum doesn't drive, and my brother's car is broken and—" She took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry. I have to go." "Of course," Ethan said immediately. "Can I help? Do you need a ride?" Maya hesitated for a split second, weighing the implications of introducing Ethan Sterling to her family crisis, then nodded. "Actually, yes. My car's been making weird noises all week, and I don't trust it for highway driving." The drive to Harborview was tense, Maya giving directions while fielding calls from various family members. Ethan found himself stealing glances at her, struck by how different she seemed in crisis mode. Focused, competent, but with an underlying vulnerability that made him want to fix everything for her. "You don't have to come in," Maya said as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "This could take hours, and my family is a lot." "I'm not leaving you here alone," Ethan said simply. Maya looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. "Okay," she said finally, "but don't say I didn't warn you." The emergency waiting room was a study in organized chaos. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, the smell of antiseptic and anxiety. Maya's family had claimed a corner section, and Ethan counted at least 8 people ranging from a toddler to a woman who was clearly the matriarch. "Maya!" The older woman rose immediately, pulling Maya into a fierce hug while speaking rapid Spanish. Then her eyes landed on Ethan, and her expression shifted to curiosity, mixed with protective suspicion. "Mama, this is Ethan," Maya said in English, her hand finding his arm in a gesture that felt both natural and significant. "Ethan, this is my mother, Carmen Rodriguez." Carmen Rodriguez was petite but formidable, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and intelligent eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of Ethan's appearance in about 3 seconds. "Nice to meet you," she said in careful English, extending her hand. "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Rodriguez," Ethan replied, accepting her handshake with genuine warmth. What followed was a blur of introductions. Maya's brother Carlos, his wife Jennifer, their 3 children, Maya's grandmother, 2 cousins, and a family friend who might have been an honorary uncle. Everyone was talking at once, switching between English and Spanish, and Ethan found himself overwhelmed by the sheer volume of human connection. "How is Papa?" Maya asked Carlos. "Stable. Broke his wrist and has a concussion, but nothing serious. Doctor says he can go home tomorrow if someone stays with him tonight." "I'll stay," Maya said immediately. "No, you won't," Carmen interjected firmly. "You have work tomorrow. Jennifer and I will take shifts." "But no arguing," Carmen said with the kind of maternal authority that brooked no disagreement. As the family logistics were sorted out, Ethan found himself sitting next to Maya's youngest nephew, a 6-year-old named Diego, who was completely fascinated by Ethan's watch. "Is it a computer?" Diego asked in perfectly clear English. "Sort of," Ethan said, showing him the various functions. It can tell time, check messages, even track how many steps I take in a day. Cool! How many steps did you take today? Ethan checked the display. 4,237. That's not very many, Diego observed with brutal childhood honesty. My mom takes like 10,000 steps at work. She's a nurse. Your nephew has a point, Maya said, having caught the end of the conversation. You really don't move around much. I'm beginning to realize there are a lot of things I don't do much, Ethan admitted. The evening stretched on, and Ethan watched in fascination as Maya's family operated. Despite the stress of the situation, there was an underlying warmth and connection that was completely foreign to his experience. When someone needed coffee, 3 people volunteered to get it. When the toddler started fussing, she was passed from lap to lap until she settled. When Carmen looked tired, Carlos immediately offered to drive her home. It was messy and loud and occasionally chaotic, but it was also undeniably loving. "You're very quiet," Maya observed during a brief moment when they were alone, the rest of the family having gone to visit her father in small groups. "Just observing," Ethan said. "Your family is overwhelming," Maya suggested. "Amazing," Ethan corrected. "I've never seen anything like it." Maya studied his face. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, then decided on honesty. "When my grandfather had his heart attack 5 years ago, I got a phone call from his lawyer, not from family, from his lawyer. I flew to Boston, handled the funeral arrangements, settled his estate and flew back to Seattle. The whole thing took 4 days, and I never spoke to another family member. The contrast hung in the air between them, stark and telling. That sounds lonely," Maya said softly. "It was efficient," Ethan replied, then caught himself. "Yes, it was very lonely." Carmen Rodriguez returned from her visit looking relieved. "He's awake and complaining about the food," she announced. "That means he's fine." The family began to disperse, making plans for tomorrow's shifts and logistics. As they prepared to leave, Carmen approached Ethan with the same assessing look she'd given him hours earlier. "You stayed," she observed. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The question was direct and deserved an honest answer. "Because Maya needed support and I care about her." Carmen nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would run at the first sign of real life," Carmen said bluntly. "Rich people usually do." Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks, but Carmen wasn't finished. "But you didn't run. You sat in uncomfortable chairs for 5 hours, played with my grandson, and didn't complain once about the coffee." She smiled suddenly, transforming her entire face. "Maybe you're not so bad after all." During the drive back to Georgetown to retrieve Maya's car, they were both quiet, processing the evening's unexpected intensity. "I'm sorry about that," Maya said finally. "Throwing you into the deep end of Rodriguez family drama wasn't exactly how I planned our second date." "Don't apologize," Ethan said. "Tonight was educational." "In what way?" Ethan pulled into the parking lot next to Maya's Honda and turned to face her. "I've spent my entire adult life believing that emotional distance was a sign of sophistication, that needing people was weakness, that independence was strength. And now I'm wondering if I've been confusing isolation with independence." Ethan reached for her hand. "Your family loves each other messily and completely and without reservation. It's beautiful, Maya. You're beautiful." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "Ethan, I know we're from different worlds," he continued. "I know this doesn't make sense on paper, but I haven't felt this connected to anything real in years." Maya squeezed his hand. "It scares me," she admitted. "What does?" "How easy it would be to fall for you," she said quietly. "How easy it would be to forget that fairy tales don't usually work out for girls like me." Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then maybe it's time to write a new kind of story. 3 weeks later, Ethan Sterling's world imploded on a Thursday morning. It started with a leaked photo on Seattle's most notorious gossip blog. Ethan and Maya leaving the hospital together, her hand in his, looking every inch the unlikely couple they were. The headline read, "Tech Billionaire's Secret Romance with Employee Raises Questions." By 10 a.m., the story had been picked up by 3 business publications. By noon, it was trending on social media. By 2 p.m., Ethan's assistant Patricia was fielding calls from reporters, and his board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Maya discovered the story when her co-worker Jessica burst into the supply closet where Maya was restocking cleaning supplies. "Girl, you need to see this," Jessica said, shoving her phone into Maya's hands. Maya stared at the screen, watching her private life dissected by strangers. The comment section was a wasteland of assumptions and judgments. Gold digger, corporate scandal, diversity publicity stunt. Each word felt like a small knife. "Maya?" Jessica's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You okay?" "I need to call in sick," Maya said, her voice strangely calm. "Can you cover my afternoon shift?" "Of course, but—" Maya was already walking away, her phone buzzing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Meanwhile, 32 floors up, Ethan faced a boardroom full of men in expensive suits who looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Explain to me," said Richard Blackstone, the board chairman, "how your personal life became front-page news in 3 different business publications." "Someone followed us and took photos," Ethan said evenly. "It happens. It happens to celebrities and politicians," snapped board member David Chen, "not to CEOs of publicly traded companies. Not unless they're making spectacularly poor decisions." "Poor decisions," Ethan's voice carried a warning edge. "Fraternizing with employees is a liability nightmare," said Margaret Williams, the only woman on the board. "The optics alone—" "Maya doesn't report to me," Ethan interrupted. "She works for the building management company, not Sterling Technologies." "Semantics," Blackstone said dismissively. "The girl cleans your office. The power imbalance is obvious to anyone with half a brain." "Don't call her the girl," Ethan said, his voice going dangerously quiet. The room fell silent. Blackstone raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon?" "Her name is Maya Rodriguez. She has a master's degree in literature, speaks 3 languages, and is more intelligent than half the people in this room. Show some respect." "Ethan," Margaret said carefully, "we understand you have feelings for this woman, but you need to consider the bigger picture. The Singapore deal collapsed partly because investors questioned your judgment. Now this. The market is already nervous about your leadership." Ethan looked around the table at faces he'd known for years, people he'd considered allies, if not friends. "Are you asking me to choose between my personal life and my position as CEO?" "We're asking you to be realistic," Blackstone said. "You can have anyone you want. Why complicate your life with someone so unsuitable?" The word hung in the air like poison. "Get out," Ethan said quietly. "Excuse me? All of you. Get out of my office. This meeting is over." "Ethan, be reasonable. Get out!" The force of his voice sent the board members scurrying like startled rabbits. Only Margaret lingered. "You're making a mistake," she said softly. "I've seen careers destroyed by less than this." "Maybe," Ethan said, staring out his window at the Seattle skyline. "But for the first time in years, I'm making choices based on what I want instead of what other people expect. If that's a mistake, at least it's mine to make." By evening, Maya had turned off her phone and retreated to her apartment, but the knocking on her door told her the outside world had found her anyway. She opened it to find Ethan standing in her hallway, looking haggard and furious. "Are you okay?" he asked immediately. "Am I okay?" Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ethan, my life just became entertainment for strangers. My family is getting phone calls from reporters asking about my relationship with the billionaire. My boss called to ask if I needed time off to handle my situation." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, stepping into her small apartment. I never wanted this to happen. But you knew it could happen, Maya said, closing the door behind him. You had to know that dating me would eventually become public. Ethan was quiet for a moment, looking around Maya's apartment. It was tiny but cozy, books stacked everywhere, plants on every available surface, artwork that was clearly handmade rather than purchased. It felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. You're right, he admitted. I knew it was possible. I just hoped... You hoped what? That we could exist in some fantasy bubble where your money and my cleaning card didn't matter. The accusation stung because it was essentially true. I hoped that what we had was strong enough to survive the outside pressure. Maya sank onto her second-hand couch, suddenly looking exhausted. Ethan, read the comments on those articles. Read what people are saying about me, about us. I'm a gold digger, a social climber, a diversity prop. You're either being manipulated or having a midlife crisis. I don't care what strangers think. Well, I do, Maya's voice rose, because unlike you, I can't afford not to care. My reputation affects whether I can find work, whether people trust me, whether I can build any kind of life for myself. Ethan sat down beside her, careful to maintain some distance. Tell me what you need. How do I fix this? Maya looked at him with something that might have been pity. You can't fix this, Ethan. That's the problem. You're used to solving things with money or power or influence, but this isn't a business problem. This is life. Then what do we do? Maya was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe your board is right. Maybe we are from worlds that are too different to bridge. Don't say that. Look around, Ethan. Maya gestured to her apartment. Look at where I live, what I drive, what I do for work. Then think about your penthouse and your Tesla and your board meetings. How long before you get tired of explaining me to people? How long before I become an embarrassment you have to manage? That will never happen, won't it? Maya turned to face him fully. Today your board called me unsuitable. Tomorrow it'll be something else. And eventually you're going to start wondering if they're right. Ethan felt panic rising in his chest. Maya, please, we can work through this. Can we? Maya stood up, pacing to her small kitchen. Your company's stock dropped 2 points today. There are articles questioning your judgment, your leadership, your fitness to run a billion-dollar corporation. All because you're dating me. The stock will recover, it always does. And what about next time? What happens when we're photographed at dinner, or holding hands, or, God forbid, kissing? What happens when your investors decide I'm too much of a liability? Ethan didn't have an answer, and his silence spoke volumes. I love you, Maya said suddenly, the words hitting Ethan like a physical blow. I love you, and that's exactly why I can't keep doing this. Maya, I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for, she continued, tears starting to fall. And I won't spend my life being judged and found wanting by people who will never see me as anything more than the cleaning lady who got above her station. Ethan stood up, moving toward her. I love you too. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for everything, Maya said, backing away from him. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes loving someone means protecting them from the damage you might cause. So what are you saying? Maya wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders in a gesture that reminded Ethan painfully of the night they'd first met. I'm saying that Cinderella stories only work in fairy tales. In real life, the glass slipper usually cuts your feet. Maya, please. I think you should go, she said quietly. And I think we should stop seeing each other. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Ethan felt his world tilting, everything he'd started to build with Maya crumbling around him. Is this really what you want? He asked. Maya looked at him with eyes full of love and heartbreak. What I want doesn't matter, this is what needs to happen. Ethan stood there for another moment, memorizing the sight of her, beautiful and brave and breaking his heart with her selflessness. Then he walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, he said without turning around. "You were never unsuitable. You were the most suitable person I've ever met. You made me want to be better than I was." And then he was gone, leaving Maya alone in her apartment with the echo of might-have-beens and the certain knowledge that she'd just made the hardest decision of her life. Outside her building, Ethan sat in his car for a long time, staring up at her lighted window and wondering how something that felt so right could go so wrong so quickly. Love, it turned out, was more complicated than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Sterling had encountered a problem that money couldn't solve and power couldn't fix. The question now was whether he was brave enough to find another way.